Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. Enterprise Bank and Trust was founded by entrepreneurs with the core focus of serving privately owned small and medium-sized businesses who have a story to tell. Enterprise Bank's commitment is to listen, learn, and guide clients to a lifetime of financial success. Enterprise Bank, together, there's no stopping you. I'm Joel Goldberg, coming to you from the Kansas City Audiovisual Studios. They create engaging spaces. Check them out at kcab.com. As many of you know, when you listen or watch this podcast, a lot of local guests, a lot of guests over the last year from out of town all around the country. And that will be the case today as we head to Indianapolis, Indiana, or the Indy area. My guest today, Josh Ross, is the co-founder and CEO of Kerauno. Josh is responsible for the overall strategic direction and vision of the company, as well as setting national marketing and sales strategy for corporate product, service, and channel sales activity. Since inception, Josh has played a visionary role in the company's mission in the world to advance human interaction through communication technologies. And we all know right now we need that communication, whether it be face-to-face or from a technological standpoint. Under his guidance, the organization has experienced triple-digit growth, built national teams for scale, and raised the largest Series A funding round in Indiana history, ranked in the top 7% globally. Josh has been featured in all kinds of publications, from CNBC and the Boston Globe to Forbes, Indianapolis Business Journal, the Indianapolis Star, and today he appears with us here on Rounding the Bases. Josh Ross is my guest, and for those that are watching, they will see Yankees stuff all behind him, and I'm going to forgive him, and I'm still very willing. I got a lot of Yankee friends, by the way, too. It's all kind of a little ruse here to be able to say hate the Yankees, but it's all good. Josh, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Joel, thanks for having me.
So there's so much that I want to cover here with you. Beyond just the success of your company. And it's always fascinating to me to see in this time right now how companies are surviving and adapting during these truly unique times. We'll get into that. But let's just begin simply with this, because I know that Kerauno does a lot of things, really cool stuff too, really innovative, of course. Tell me about Kerauno, your company.
Yeah, so Kerauno is all about advancing human interactions. So all of our technologies are about advancing human interactions. So everything that we've built is for improving communications. So we had what's called KUCast, which is a cloud-based unified communications platform. We just recently transitioned that to our largest partner. And then we've got the middle bucket is experiential text messaging. So we help folks with managed and measured text messaging. The third column of what we do here at Kerauno is what's called intelligent workflow. So it's all about business automation and business process automation through communications.
So it's a lot. And I would think too, the beauty of this is it's always evolving. I mean, that's the fun of technology, and what worked a couple of years ago may not work as well, or you're constantly coming up with new ideas. How much of that is you? How much of a tinker or a dreamer or a big vision guy are you?
Well, the vision is what I get energy from. So yeah, I'm certainly, I've always been an entrepreneur, always loved entrepreneurship. And so we're constantly looking, you mentioned it, but the changing landscape of technology and communication, it's happening super fast. So it's rapid change. So this company, the middle bucket that I mentioned there, K-Launch, the experiential messaging, that's where I spend a lot of my time these days, which is helping with the thought leadership around communication interaction through text messaging and how we can better engage folks with more authentic, empathetic types of messaging. So when you think of text messaging in general, a lot of folks think of coupons and outbound blasting messages. But there's a lot of evolution happening in this space, and I think it's going to change the landscape for a lot of things, whether it's even how business to consumer interactions take place, maybe even media as how it interacts with consumers.
I think for sure with media too. I mean, I look at my industry, and on the simplest level, not no one, but most people aren't getting the newspaper on their doorstep or their driveway anymore. People, for the most part, aren't sitting down and watching the local news the way they did. And I understand, I got a lot of friends in both of those businesses. They're not obsolete, but they're having to change. And they're trying to find their way too. It's no different than us. I mean, how much are we communicating from a baseball broadcast standpoint? Certainly the same old medium on TV, but you've got to be active on social. You've got to be able to find ways to connect with people. So I want to ask you about that. I mean, how do you find the best way to effectively communicate when we have all, in my opinion, been bombarded with so many attempts by people, by companies to reach out in ways that oftentimes don't work? Does that make sense? Like, so often I see something and it might just be somebody trying to get my business with a LinkedIn message, and I'm like, delete. And I haven't even really read it because I'm just, there's a fatigue to it, right? But I also, there has to be a very powerful, when you figure it out, which I think you guys have, a powerful way of connecting.
Yeah, I really think authenticity is a big part of communication interaction. So, if you have a following base and getting it flipped to a text channel, the ability to interact with an empathetic, we always say we start with questioning and listening to your customers, but building deeper relationships through this medium of text has been a really powerful channel for folks to build their brand and interact. And people want personalization of communication too. They want big brands. I don't know when was the last time a big brand actually reached out to you, pick a brand, and said, "Hey, Joel, how are you doing? How are things going?" Right? It's all about this transactional interaction that takes place. But when you open that dialogue of communication through, in our case, a text message, and you ask those questions and you build the empathy and you build the rapport, which can lead to behavioral change in your interaction. These are things that just really drive home for people, and it builds a genuine authenticity with the brands that are there. And we're seeing that whether it's professional sports, we're seeing that in healthcare interactions that take place for COVID tracing, we're seeing it in government interactions that need to take place. So really, communication is such a key thing for how businesses succeed. And you can kill a deal quickly with communicating imperfectly, and none of us are perfect, but just that communication channel and how well it's derived and how many interactions you have and how authentic those are, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I've received, and then it was reconfirmed to me somewhat recently, a local guy and friend of mine here who has said, and he's in business development for a construction company, and he has talked about how I may not even really mention what I do to someone or talk about business or my end of things until sometimes the second or third coffee. And we all want to just go for it. And then what was confirmed was I was moderating a panel. This is a nice name drop with Simon Sinek. And he talked about how often would you go on a date and ask somebody to marry you on the first date? But yet how often do we do that, right? Yeah. From a business standpoint. And so I'm really intrigued by the text messaging aspect of this. And so many of us now are receiving even texts. A lot of times, thankfully, this is over with. It was the political ads and have you voted here, registered, or blah, blah, blah. But we have been programmed to shut all of that out. So how do you cut through that? And you talked, Josh, I mean, I guess I want to get a little bit more specific here because you covered it, authenticity and empathy, which so often is lacking in these forms of communication. So how do you cut through that in an empathetic way?
So we have a proprietary methodology called K3I, which stands for involve, inform, and incent. And most text companies are all about information outbound. You mentioned those political ads that you get, right? So it's a constant barraging of a messaging that comes out to you one way. And text should really be a two-way authentic communication. It should be, you should be building relationship capital through the authenticity of those questions that you're asking. And so, you mentioned this before, but building relationship capital is a big part of that Simon Sinek piece where he's talking about, you don't go and ask to get married on the first date. You really need to have a lot of dialogue with people and show that you care. And through that dialogue, you build relationship capital. And over time, people will inevitably want to work and be a part of your brand. And so that's what we're seeing. But that the K3I, involve, inform, and incent, we're also, as humans, we're folks that like to barter a little bit. So if you put that incentive into a text message, folks are willing to give up data and information just as an incentive piece. So if you give them something in exchange, some tchotchkes or something in exchange for that interaction, they're willing to exchange with you, build that dialogue, deeper rapport, and ultimately leads to better relationships with your customers, fans, constituents, and followers.
And I suspect that with this and everything that you're doing, there is, and I mentioned this a little before too, constant evolution And for an entrepreneur at heart, well, not at heart, you are an entrepreneur, you have been your whole life. This has to be a lot of fun to be able to
it's amazing
those two things, right?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to see how people react. So I study human behavior, human communication all the time. I'm kind of geeked out on that stuff just to understand how people respond. So we talk about the science of words a lot internally too. So certain words that you put into a particular message or how we communicate with these particular words, it drives emotion and interaction. We're seeing some of that with big tech, that's happened on social channels in a negative way. But there's a lot of these through the science of words, you can truly drive meaningful outcomes and meaningful interactions by sparking emotion or ensuring that folks are engaged in a deeper way through those types of communication. So, yeah, we've seen a lot of interesting things happen over the course and how communications are shifting over the course of the last probably 2 years here that we've seen it kind of shifting into a text based interaction. And the pull through of sponsorship and all the things that can happen through a text channel, it's a laser shot connection right direct to someone's personal device. And so you do have to use caution and care when you're interacting with people and do it in the correct way.
It feels like there's a moment there. I mean, we all have first impressions, right? And we hopefully know how to make those in person. Some of us do well with that. Others struggle with it, and it matters. So it seems to me as though you have a quick moment there to make a first impression of someone saying, oh, this piques my interest versus delete. And guess what? If I get that text again, I'm probably not looking at it. So that's a big moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge moment. You get 120 characters or whatever it is there to be able to state your message. And when I say state your message, we open with questioning a lot because we want to start that dialogue so we can listen. The only way to listen in the text channel is to ask a question. And so when you ask that question, you get dialogue with folks, you get interaction, and they draw closer to your brand. I mean, we've seen this happen time and time again. We work with a lot of professional sports teams with this fan engagement, fan interaction. And when you personalize those messages that go out, if you leave a stadium and the mascot sends you a text message with your name on a placard that says, hey, playing all by myself, dancing around saying, hey, Josh, we hated to see you leave the stadium. It does do something for you personally to get you connected better to that brand.
And then maybe give them a little incentive of something they might get when they come back and it's there right in their mind as they're walking out with that experience, right?
Yeah. And incenting through that, so that we can continue the dialogue.
It's so fascinating. I've got a couple of other questions somewhat related. First, along with all of this, is how much of this is generational? And who are you shooting for in this? I mean, I know that you want to take care of all potential clients and prospects and beyond that too, but the way the, say, 55-year-old CEO is going to respond is going to be different than the 28-year-old or the millennial or even the Gen Zs that are coming up too. It seems to me that younger generation has a lot of this figured out because they don't have that, old guy stuff of, well, this is the way we've always done it. And I always want to slap myself anytime I'm thinking that way because it's not healthy, right? We have to keep moving forward. That's the world that you live in. But how do you cut through those generations?
It's really interesting that the generational gaps aren't as large as we think from a text messaging perspective. So there's a lot of folks utilizing text message. One of the stats that came to us from the mortgage industry, folks that wanted to do 100% contactless loan process, I think it was 67% of Gen Y, Gen C said they wanted 100% contactless loan process. 54% of Gen X and baby boomers was 52%. So there's not a big gap between folks in that are interested in this type of exchange. Now, everyone's turned off by a message that doesn't resonate, right? So you got to be careful about, we always say what you say, when you say it, why you say it, how you say it, and where you say it. It all matters. The communication interaction, making sure that these messages are on point and interacting with that particular channel. But to break through the barrier, first of all, I mean, again, I don't think it's as big a gap as we might think on messaging. People are, there was some stats recently too, with the pandemic, people are more likely to be in front of their phone over the course of the last year. They're spending a lot more time on mobile devices. And so even those folks that are in the baby boomer plus category are spending a lot of time there and learning how to navigate these devices so that they can communicate with family, friends, and really just, I told you, I think before we came on the air, we're all built for community. And so you got to have ways to interact with people and communicate. So we're seeing that turn to mobile devices. And so that's really the gap has been not as big of a hurdle as one might think, because people are using these technologies more frequently.
So that was my last question before we get to the baseball themed questions, is within your own company. And I mentioned to you before we came on, as we were having this discussion, that to me, it's been the most fascinating conversation to have over the last year, because one, the companies that are doing well and have hung in there, they had a culture already. They had an identity. They had a vision. They had a mission of people that were buying in. And that's helped, but they've also been very challenged by suddenly having this disruption. We're all going through it. We're all stir crazy if we're working at home or been stuck at home. God knows that my family has to be sick of me. I mean, I didn't travel for a whole baseball season last year. They're not used to this. But two questions. One, how many employees at Kerauno, and what have you been able to do to keep your folks engaged and energized?
Yeah, so hundreds of employees in the larger company. For us to be able to keep folks engaged, I think early on we were a little thrown off. I'm sure all of us were a little thrown off as to what is this? How do we react? What do we do? I would have never taken all of our employees and moved them remotely, right? Just because culturally we need to be connected. But we've had to adjust to this new normal. We've had to figure out how to engage with one another. A lot of this is through video, as you mentioned. But something that we've implemented, and I mentioned this earlier off air as well, is just the interaction through, as we've been able to open up a little bit, have some individualized lunches with some of our staff and team members, just to keep that community built, the interaction built between them on a face-to-face basis. So we can try to replicate the human experience on video, but it is very different, as we all know, having lived this for the last year or so. So I think being able to connect with people personally is a big part of keeping people engaged. And then just a lot of check-ins with people. So unwork related, right? So just a lot of check-ins just to see how they're doing, how their family's doing. When you move home and you've got, in my case, 3 kids, and I know a lot of our team members have, in some cases, 4 and 5 kids. These are folks that have all kinds of things going on at home. Kids are not in school. They're doing work remote. A lot of extra pressure put onto the family. So giving them some space and some time just to talk. And I think it's so important. I mentioned it earlier with text messaging and listening, but it is really important just to listen. And so sometimes we just open up the dialogue, turn on the video and say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Tell us about what's happening in your world, and give people some space to be able to share their stories and what they're going through.
I heard an interesting one recently, and we've all heard versions of this, but it's something actually I've tried to think about every single day. Listening is a gift to others. Silence is a gift to yourself. And I think that's probably more true than ever before, because people need to be listened to. They always need to be listened to. You know that. But I think right now, when everybody feels so isolated in whatever way it is, I also think that from an empathy piece, there's never been a better time to be empathetic, because we all should have an idea of everyone going through something, which probably always was the case, by the way, too. But now we're all going through something a little bit similar. So it's such fascinating times, in my opinion. I want to get to the baseball themed questions brought to you by Kissick Construction. Trusted team, reliable partner. Check them out at kissickco.com. And yeah, I made the joke about the Yankees. Got a couple of Yankee jerseys behind you, and looks like a very, very nice Indy car too. You are an Indy guy and been there your whole life. But let's start with the home run question. What's the biggest home run you've hit in your career, Josh?
The very first contract we signed in 2008 was the biggest home run. So that put us on the map as an organization. I've built and grown, sold companies, but the very first contract, 6 months in, was a little over $150,000 a month in contracted revenue, long-term contracted revenue, put this particular company on the map. And that was something that I would say was the big home run.
What about a swing and a miss? And what did you learn from it?
Well, there's been a lot of swing and misses in entrepreneurship. So I would say the first one was just the lack of, I think, interaction with our staff early on. I was out selling solutions and spending less time in the office and connecting with people. And so I think that's probably the biggest swing and a miss early on that I can say from an entrepreneurship perspective, because it's so important to stay engaged with your teams early on so that you can stay tight knit, to give clear direction. And there's so much in the way of persistence that's needed inside of entrepreneurship. So yeah, I would say that's the swing and a miss.
I've seen that so often in sports too, where for us, for instance, with the Kansas City Royals, we got a new manager last year, Mike Matheny, former St. Louis Cardinals manager. And it was just very impressive to watch him in his first spring training, spending more time just kind of walking from station to station and chatting with people and doing less coaching and letting his coaches coach. Doesn't mean he wasn't walking around with a fungo and doing some things. And as a former catcher, he's capable of popping behind the plate and catching somebody's bullpen session. But what I noticed more gets back to what you were saying, as the leader, a lot of asking and listening. I think it applies to leadership in any profession, really.
I think you have to be present as a leader, and that's the point of the swing and the miss, is that you've got to be present. So you've got to focus on the team and the staff and building these people up and listening, as I mentioned before. That presence is critical to building that culture out.
Let's talk small ball, which really was originally intended to be a culture question. It turned into a book, Small Ball, Big Results, because the answers over these last few years were just so fascinating, because no one really had the exact same small ball answer. But the simple question is this: what are the little things that add up to the big things for you in Kerauno?
I'm going to go back to spending time with people, and that is the number one thing. I always say our work is our life's work, and our people make everything possible. And we have to spend time with our staff. So I've heard people say customers come first. I don't agree with that. I think the employees come first, and then they'll take care of the customers. And we've got to spend a lot more time cultivating relationships with our team, helping them stay on point, helping them understand the mission and vision of the organization to ensure that they can carry out that success. Any team, baseball, whatever, you have to have coaching. You have to have the team that those are the folks that are on the field making it happen day in and day out. And as a coach, you've got to cultivate the relationships, make sure you're staying in touch with these people, understand where they're coming from, building empathy with them in these relationships to build a rapport so that you can achieve greatness. And I think it all boils down to just taking care of the people.
Could not agree with you more. There's a full chapter in that book just about people, which seems so basic and obvious, by the way, but and I mentioned this in the book, but I'll mention it here. I can never mention it enough. The late former owner of the Kansas City Royals, who I spent 12 of my first 13 years here with, David Glass, former CEO of Walmart, would always say, it begins with people. You do nothing in life without people. And that was always powerful for me to hear from a guy that was a billionaire.
Yeah.
And it sounds so obvious, but no matter what profession you're in, you can't do it alone. And maybe we could find a few of them, but I always say even the tennis player or the golfer, they've got a team, they've got a coach, they've got an agent, and on and on and on. It takes a team no matter what you do. Okay, 4 final questions as we round the bases. We'll be a little bit all over the place here. First one is this. I know you were an entrepreneur at a fairly young age. What was the first business? I think I heard it was in college, but how did you dip your feet into the entrepreneurial world?
So I was working many jobs trying to figure it out. My wife and I got married. We've got a 23-year-old. So we were trying to figure out life. And I came across, went to a trade show and came across long distance service in the late 90s. And I built my first company on the back of a long distance company called True Communications, which I founded and started. Long distance was very different at those times. We were selling it for a lot more. It's taken a sharp dive, but we built a great company all around people, all around helping customers understand how they could get better rates, how they could communicate more effectively. These were all things that we built it upon. And I started that sophomore year of college. There was a ton of ups and downs to that process, as you can imagine. I probably was the laughing stock of my family as I printed out flyers to go out and pass them out at homes in Terre Haute, Indiana. I graduated from Indiana State in Terre Haute, Indiana. So my wife was kind enough to go around with me, pass out these flyers, put these things on the doors, which ultimately led to us being able to sell long distance service to hospitals and municipals, and ultimately the exit, which was great for all of us.
I spent a very, very small amount of time in Terre Haute. Could have been more, by the way, too. And I talk about this a lot in speeches with people too, is in my field, it's impossible to get into TV. And by the way, I was not the best one. I was far from it. I didn't know what I was doing coming out of the University of Wisconsin. It certainly wasn't the looks, and I found my way in. But after rejection, the short of the story is I started picking up the phone and calling random TV stations and telling them I was passing through town next week, which wasn't true. But if they said they'd be there and they would meet with me, I suddenly hopped in my car and I started doing it. One of those spots was Terre Haute. I didn't get the job in Terre Haute, but it could have happened. I ended up in another small market. And so who knows? I could have been covering.
One thing there that you just described is the persistence of staying the course no matter what. I mean, that's entrepreneurship is all about, I mean, persistence and grit and perseverance. These are things that you just have to have. And you're going to get no's, you're going to get beat down and through the process, and just being able to stay the course and having that clear direction to reach the execution that you have for yourself. So it sounds like you've done that, Joel.
Yeah, and it was a lot of years ago, but the thing is that it was instinctual. I don't know that anybody ever taught me how to do it. It was almost a survival in terms of my dream.
Yeah.
Because after being told no 20, 25 times from, TV stations in Montana and all over the country, it was like, okay, I'm going to either go work for the local restaurant that I'd worked at in high school and when I was home in college, which, by the way, paid more than the first TV station, or I'm going to figure it out. And it was. And this is going to lead to my second question as we round the bases here, because I don't like cold calling. I'm not comfortable with cold calling, but my back was against the wall and I had no choice. And I'm always so amazed at the people and the companies that are able to have success in funding. And so I mentioned in the intro that you had the largest Series A funding round in Indiana. How are you able to do it? One. And two, I know you've had some pretty big time investors along the way, which might explain the Yankee stuff behind you too. But tell me about the funding and the fundraising and how you've been able to do it.
So everything in business, I believe, starts with relationships. And so we sponsored IndyCar, maybe started sponsoring probably 8 to 10 years ago with Michael Andretti and Andretti Autosport, which led to relationships under the tent, kind of private relationships that we built, which ultimately led to a relationship with the Steinbrenner family, which does explain the jerseys on the back wall here. And then, we pulled together, we were really, we had organically grown all of our businesses. So we had organically grown these companies and we really weren't looking for outside capital. We always wanted to make sure that there was a cultural alignment with capital before we ever took capital down. So we'd spent a lot of time having meetings, trying to figure out this cultural fit for who could come in and help us from a capital perspective, take these businesses to the next level. And so through those relationships, forged more and put a team of folks together to raise the largest Series A capital round in Indiana history. And then, as you mentioned, top 7% of the world. So it all came through the relationships. It all came through building that rapport with people. And ultimately, it's worked out for all of us, which has been great.
It's the foundation, right? I mean, the relationships, you and I, and we've just met, but we're aligned in this connectivity, this love of people, this need to take care of people and to have those relationships. You know this as well as I do. You don't have that success without that foundation, and clearly you built it. But there had to have been a moment for you along the way there where you thought, oh my gosh, we got this. I don't know if you ever felt that way, but you know what I mean? Like, you knew you had a good product, you knew that you had a good company, but when you start to see that response, that has to be pretty overwhelming in the greatest of ways.
Yeah, I think the ultimate with people wanting to put cash in, it says a lot about the organization, the culture, and what relationships we have built. I mean, and to put that level of cash in. So they truly believed in us as leaders and as relationship builders and extenders to the community. And that's how we've built this company, all the companies. I think we had, I think there were 9 LLCs, and I was the chairman of the board of those 9. So, I mean, it's been a wonderful journey, a crazy journey, and one that's been arduous at times. But those those times when you kind of cross the milestone, and that was one of those points where when we got that deal wrapped up, and we crossed the milestone there from a capital raise perspective and really put us on the map, it's super rewarding to just sit back and I didn't take long because I'm not a guy that relishes a long time in those successes, but I did spend a day or so just thinking about, man, the journey that we've been on and the team that we'd put together to be able to pull this off and then take it on into the future, which is what we're doing now.
Yeah, in sports terms, and this will lead me to my third question. You hear it in football all the time where they say, all right, we'll celebrate tonight, or we'll celebrate on Victory Monday, and then it's back to the drawing board to get ready for the next opponent. That certainly is the entrepreneurial way and the competitive way of, hey, enjoy your win, but you can't live on that win forever, and you're moving on to the next thing. So that's my third question. You got a chance to go to the Super Bowl as we're recording this. It's 34 days after the Super Bowl. For my audience in Kansas City, they don't want to hear a breakdown of the game. They've already moved on themselves. But when I were talking in advance too, what was that experience like? Super Bowls are weird to me. I mean, to date myself a little bit, I used to cover NFL. The last Super Bowl that I covered was Tom Brady's first back in 2000. The 2001 season would have been like early February 2002 down in New Orleans. And here he is all these years later, and he's winning again. But what was that environment like? Because Super Bowls oftentimes are so corporate, and it's not like going to a home Colts game or a Chiefs game or whatever it is. What was that experience with some fans in the stands at really the greatest sports event of the year?
It was an amazing experience. I think a lot of it had to do, it is typically more of a corporate driven event, but I tell you that the connectedness of being able to be in a stadium with 25,000, I think there were 25,000 folks there. I mean, hearing the crowd, hearing that, being able to be around people after such a long time of being cooped up and not being at sporting events. I'm a huge sports fan. I'm out at these events and participating and wanting to be around people. So it was outside of, I wanted KC to take the championship. Outside of that, that not falling short there. I mean, it was a wonderful time and the ability to get together with people. And they did have a number of cardboard cutouts, but man, they made it look and feel like it was a full on, full game. So it was a great time.
We all need some of that right now, for sure. Last question, my walk-off for you, and I don't think I'm giving away any proprietary secrets, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about a text message, but you said something to me that struck me before about words making a difference. Is there a key word or two that could do all of us better, and are there some words that we should stay away from? Because like I mentioned before too, I could see it in about half of a sentence when someone's reaching out to me through social media. Usually it's telling me what I need, and they don't actually know, and I already have what they need. Like, delete, sorry. But are there some words that we all could use to communicate better?
I think
with that, we just lost Josh. We'll see if he pops back in here in a moment. I'll start to wind down as we wait for that word. It's possible that, just hit a button or whatever it is. So we'll see if Josh pops back in. But while I am waiting, I will tap dance a little bit. It's what I do on the TV side. And just give a shout out to my sponsors, Kansas City Audio Visual, Kissa Construction, and Enterprise Bank. Businesses often come to Enterprise Bank because they demand and frankly are worthy of more than the status quo and need a local partner who understands their business. So a couple of other pieces of business. And then if we get Josh back, great. If we don't, we'll just wrap it up and thank everybody. But really fascinated by some of these conversations because we all need to communicate on a better level at this point. We're all having to do it in different ways. And really, that's what we're doing on these podcasts too. And so if you think about it, at least from my standpoint, I've got the book. I do a lot of speaking, but this podcast gives me a chance to do what I love best, which is telling stories and a chance to connect with people and all that. So one of the things that I want to encourage everybody to do is, I'm not saying everybody should go out and start a podcast, but how can you better connect with your clients? How can you better connect in different ways with other people? And this is certainly a way to do that. I want to throw a little bit of information out there in terms of Kerauno. And if you're looking for more information about them, the website is klaunch.io. klaunch.io. And you'll see everything that you need on their website there. And I think that we just got Josh back. And so he did what I was doing, Josh, was what I've done for my whole career in television. You just tap dance, and either it comes back or it doesn't. And so I've taken care of all my end of show business. I've thanked all my sponsors, and I've left everyone hanging on what those words might be, knowing that you probably were going to pop back in here. So what are some key words for us?
Yeah, what I was saying is any word that can build empathy and build engagement. So these and the correct emotion. And so there's a number of words that can drive that. I don't know that there's a single key word that I would say that drives, particular.
I think we're just having technical difficulties with Josh. So and by the way, for all I know, it's me. I don't think I was touching anything at that point, but it's usually like when something technically goes wrong, at least my crew on TV might say that I've hit a button or done something. I don't know. But anyway, we keep waiting for that word. But I think that the interesting thing here, and I didn't know that there would be a key word per se, it's two words that Josh just mentioned that I find really interesting. And they're the two, I just wrote them down because we remember whether it be acronyms or patterns, and they were two E words: empathy and emotion. Maybe a third word would be encourage. I'm not really sure. But empathy to me is walking in someone else's shoes. When you can walk in someone else's shoes, you're going to have a greater understanding of how they might be feeling. Your radar's up a little bit more. And when you can demonstrate to them that you are walking in their shoes or want to learn a little bit more, then that empathy piece ends up becoming a greater part of it. Welcome back, Josh.
Hey, for the second time. I don't know what's going on here.
I don't know. We got gremlins, but what I was saying, I'm going to give you the final thought. And if I lose you again, I'll just say goodbye now. It's fine. But what I was doing is that I wrote down two words, and I get it. There's not a key word, but two words that you shared with me, empathy and emotion. They both happen to be E words. We remember things that way. And so maybe a third, sometimes we go in thirds, will be encouragement. I don't know. But to me, empathy is walking in someone else's shoes and letting them know that you have a feel for who they are or what they're going through on an everyday basis. So I'll let you take that there, and whether it's keywords or how you connect with people.
Yeah, and I think I like your encouragement piece. So being encouraging and that questioning of text messaging or those interactions that you have, opening up the dialogue, as we mentioned before, with the question. That's the only way to listen through a text message, and building with empathy and encouragement. And I mean, these are key words that are going to help for interactions. So appreciate you having me on, Joel.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Josh. I got to come up with an acronym for that, or maybe it's just the triple E's: empathy, emotion, and encouragement. Don't have to, but you know the way people learn. And I think it's very important, being inquisitive and wondering about people. So for anyone, again, I mentioned it a little while ago, that wants to learn more about Josh's company, you can go to K-Launch, the letter K, and then the word launch, klaunch.io, to find out more about Kerauno. Josh, thanks so much for spending time today. Really enjoyed it. Stay safe. Continued success in Indianapolis and around the country. Really enjoyed the visit.
Thanks so much, Joel. Really appreciate it.
All right, good to visit with the co-founder and CEO of Kerauno, Josh Ross. My name is Joel Goldberg. Thanks for listening and watching, everyone, and hope to catch you next time on Rounding the Bases.